In the quiet hills of Texas, where morning mist clings to weathered fence posts and the past seems to echo in every creaking barn door, two broken souls are about to discover that healing sometimes comes from the most unexpected places. Lila Sandoval never imagined that her grandmother's old sheep farm would become her refuge, or that pregnancy at 42 would feel like both a blessing and a terrifying leap into the unknown. When a storm brings a wounded horse and its mysterious owner to her doorstep, she finds herself face to face with Reid Callahan, a man whose wealth can't fill the silence left by loss, whose carefully guarded heart mirrors her own. But when two people have been hurt so deeply, can they really trust love again? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sunrise painted the Texas hill country in shades of amber and rose, casting long shadows across the rolling pastures that stretched toward the horizon like a patchwork quilt sewn by generations of weathered hands. Lila Sandoval stood at the kitchen window of her grandmother's farmhouse, one hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly, the other wrapped around a steaming mug of chamomile tea. At 6 months pregnant, she moved with the careful grace of a woman who had learned to listen to her body's wisdom, each step measured and deliberate. The house held 40 years of memories in its creaking floorboards and sun-faded wallpaper. Grandmother Elena's presence lingered in every corner, the hand-embroidered curtains that caught the morning light, the cast-iron skillet that still hung beside the stove, the rocking chair by the fireplace where she had told stories of the old country and newer tales of building a life in this harsh, beautiful land. Lila had inherited more than property when Elena passed 2 years ago. She had inherited a legacy of quiet strength and the kind of love that endures through seasons of drought and plenty. The sheep farm hadn't been worked in earnest since Elena's arthritis made the daily care too difficult, but Lila found comfort in the routine of feeding the small flock that remained. 12 ewes and an aging ram named Joaquin, who had been Elena's pride and joy. The animals provided purpose to her days and a connection to something larger than the wreckage of her marriage. 3 months ago, when her ex-husband Marcus had made it clear that he wanted nothing to do with their unborn child, Lila had packed her Honda Civic with the essentials of her life and driven the 8 hours from Austin to this sanctuary. She was a certified nurse midwife with 15 years of experience bringing babies into the world, but she had never imagined she would be facing motherhood alone at 42. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had spent her career guiding other women through the miracle of birth, offering comfort and expertise during their most vulnerable moments. Now she was the one learning to navigate the tender fears and fierce protectiveness that came with carrying new life. Her hands, which had delivered hundreds of babies, would soon cradle her own daughter for the ultrasound, had revealed a girl, though Lila had chosen to keep that knowledge to herself, savoring it like a secret prayer. The kitchen table held the detritus of her new life: prenatal vitamins beside a stack of farming magazines, knitting needles and soft yellow yarn next to veterinary supplies she'd ordered online. Since arriving at the farm, she had discovered an unexpected aptitude for animal care. Her medical training translated surprisingly well to tending cuts and scrapes on the sheep, and she found peace in the quiet work of healing. On her left ring finger, she wore Elena's wedding band, a simple gold circle that had weathered 53 years of marriage to a man who had loved her grandmother with the steady devotion of sunrise. Lila had removed her own rings the day she signed the divorce papers, but Elena's ring felt different. It spoke of enduring love, of partnerships that deepened rather than soured with time. It reminded her that not all love stories ended in lawyers' offices and divided assets. The morning routine had become sacred to her. Rise with the sun, feed the animals, tend the small vegetable garden Elena had planted near the back porch. The work was physical but not demanding, perfect for her changing body. Dr. Martinez, the local veterinarian who had become an unexpected friend, had assured her that the activity was good for both her and the baby, as long as she listened to her body and rested when needed. Carmen Martinez was 62, with silver-streaked hair and hands that spoke of decades spent healing animals. She had known Elena well and had taken Lila under her wing without question or judgment. In a world where Lila had grown accustomed to explaining her choices, Carmen's quiet acceptance was a gift. She stopped by twice a week, officially to check on the sheep, but really to ensure Lila wasn't isolating herself completely. "A baby needs community," Carmen had said during one of their conversations over coffee, "but first, a mother needs to heal her own heart." The neighboring farm belonged to the Chen family, Chinese immigrants who had established a successful organic vegetable operation. Mrs. Chen, a woman of Elena's generation, had appeared at Lila's door the second week, with a casserole and broken English that conveyed more warmth than many fluent conversations Lila had endured in her former life. The elderly woman would arrive unannounced, clucking over Lila's garden and offering gentle advice about pregnancy that transcended cultural barriers. "Baby come when baby ready," Mrs. Chen would say, patting Lila's belly with weathered hands. "You trust body, trust nature. Women know these things." The isolation Lila had initially craved was slowly giving way to something to pair a sense of belonging that had been missing from her marriage. Marcus had been a successful attorney, ambitious and image-conscious, who viewed her midwifery practice as quaint rather than meaningful. Their social circle had been composed of other professionals who measured worth in income and status symbols. When Lila had suggested starting a family, Marcus had balked at the timing, always pushing the conversation to "next year" or "when things settle down at the firm." The pregnancy had been unplanned, a surprise that had revealed the fault lines in their relationship with brutal clarity. Marcus had wanted her to handle the situation, as he put it, unwilling to complicate his partnership track with the responsibilities of fatherhood. The conversation that followed had been the final confirmation that they had grown into strangers sharing a mortgage and little else. Now, as the baby shifted and stretched inside her, Lila felt only gratitude for the ending that had seemed so devastating at the time. This child would grow up surrounded by love, even if it looked different from the traditional family structure she had once imagined. The farm would be her playground, the animals her companions, and the changing seasons her teachers about the rhythms of life. The financial concerns that had initially kept her awake at night were manageable. Elena had left the farm free and clear, and Lila's savings, combined with her work as a freelance birth consultant for hospitals in the surrounding counties, would support them comfortably. She had discovered that many rural hospitals were desperate for experienced midwives, and she could provide services from the farm, traveling when needed but maintaining the peaceful home base she craved. The nursery was taking shape in Elena's former sewing room, a small space that faced east to catch the morning sun. Lila had painted the walls a soft sage green and was slowly furnishing it with pieces that spoke of permanence and hope. A rocking chair from the local antique shop, a changing table built by Mrs. Chen's grandson, and a crib that had been Elena's own, carefully restored and updated to meet modern safety standards. As she moved through the quiet house, Lila's thoughts often turned to the future she was building. She imagined teaching her daughter to tend the garden, to gather eggs from the chickens she planned to add to the farm, to find wonder in the simple miracle of seeds becoming sustenance. The child would grow up understanding that life was both fragile and resilient, that love could take many forms, and that sometimes the most profound journeys began with the courage to start over. The loneliness that had driven her to the farm was evolving into solitude, a chosen state that felt nurturing rather than empty. She had rediscovered parts of herself that had been buried under years of trying to fit into Marcus's vision of the perfect attorney's wife. Here, she could be fully herself, the woman who found profound meaning in guiding new life into the world, who saw beauty in the everyday miracles of growth and change, who believed that healing was possible even after the deepest wounds. The approaching storm clouds on the horizon seemed to promise change, though Lila couldn't have imagined how dramatically her carefully constructed peace was about to be disrupted. She finished her tea and prepared for another day of the quiet routine that had become her anchor, unaware that fate was already setting the stage for an encounter that would challenge everything she thought she knew about love, loss, and the courage to trust again. The storm arrived with the violence that only Texas weather could summon, transforming the peaceful dawn into a maelstrom of wind and driving rain. Lila woke to the sound of her tin roof protesting against the assault, the familiar creaks and groans of the old farmhouse taking on an urgent quality that pulled her from sleep at 4:30 in the morning. Lightning illuminated her bedroom in stark, blue-white flashes, followed by thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations. At 6 months pregnant, getting out of bed required strategy and patience. She rolled to her side, pushed herself upright, and padded to the window to assess the storm's fury. The wind had turned her grandmother's carefully tended flower garden into a battlefield of broken stems and scattered petals. Rain lashed against the glass with such force that she could barely make out the barn through the deluge. The sheep would be huddled in their shelter, but she worried about the older ewes and made a mental note to check on them once the worst had passed. These spring storms could be brutal, but usually moved through quickly, leaving behind a landscape washed clean and the sweet smell of rain-soaked earth. She had just returned to bed when a sound cut through the storm's roar, high, keening cry that raised the hair on her arms. It came again, unmistakably the sound of an animal in distress. Lila threw on her robe and boots, grabbed a flashlight, and made her way to the kitchen window that faced the front pasture. Another flash of lightning revealed what had caused the cry. Near her fence line, a horse stood with its head hanging low, favoring its left front leg. Even through the rain and darkness, she could see the dark stain spreading down the animal's shoulder and leg. Blood. The horse was alone, no rider in sight, wearing a bridle but no saddle. The leather reins hung loose and torn, and there were scratches along the horse's flanks that suggested a violent encounter with barbed wire or thick brush. This was no casual escape from a nearby pasture. Something had gone terribly wrong. Lila's midwife training kicked in automatically. Assess, stabilize, treat. The principles applied whether the patient walked on 2 legs or 4. She pulled on her rain slicker and stepped into the storm. The wind tried to knock her sideways as she made her way toward the injured animal. The horse lifted its head at her approach, ears flicking nervously, but it was too hurt to bolt. Up close, the damage was worse than she had feared. A deep gash ran from the shoulder down the foreleg, and the animal was trembling with shock and pain. "Easy, girl," she murmured, extending her hand palm up for the mare to scent. "Let me help you." The horsey, beautiful quarter horse with a coat that would probably be golden in daylight allowed Lila to approach. She ran gentle hands over the wound, her clinical assessment overriding her emotional response to the animal's suffering. The cut was deep, but hadn't severed any major vessels. Still, it needed immediate attention. As she stood in the driving rain, trying to figure out how to get a wounded horse into her barn, headlights cut through the darkness. A pickup truck appeared through the storm, moving fast despite the conditions. It pulled up to her gate, and a man emerged from the driver's side. Even in the poor visibility, she could see he was tall and moved with the kind of controlled urgency that spoke of familiarity with crisis. He wore a cowboy hat pulled low against the rain and boots that had seen serious work. As he approached, another lightning flash illuminated his face, weathered, probably mid-40s, with the kind of bone-deep weariness that came from carrying burdens too heavy to set down. "That's my horse," he called over the storm's noise. "I've been tracking her for 2 hours." His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being in charge, but also a note of genuine concern that told Lila this wasn't just about valuable property. He loved this animal. "She's hurt badly," Lila called back. "We need to get her out of this storm." The man she assumed he was Reid Callahan, though they hadn't been formally introduced, approached the mare with practiced ease. His hands moved over the horse with the confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime around these animals, but she saw his jaw tighten when he assessed the wound. "How bad?" he asked, not looking away from his horse. "Deep laceration, probably needs stitches. She's lost some blood, but not enough to be life-threatening if we act quickly. The main concern is infection and shock." He looked at her then, really looked, taking in her pregnant state and the clinical way she had assessed his animal. "You're a veterinarian?" "Midwife, but anatomy is anatomy, and trauma is trauma." For a moment, they stood in the rain, studying each other. She could see him weighing options, pride warring with practicality. The horse made the decision for him by taking a stumbling step toward Lila's barn. "She trusts you," he said simply. "What do you need me to do?" Working together, they managed to guide the injured mare into Lila's barn. The familiar smell of hay and old wood felt like sanctuary after the chaos of the storm. Lila's emergency supplies the veterinary kit she had assembled over months of caring for the sheep were stored in the tack room Elena had maintained. Reid helped her set up a makeshift treatment area in an empty stall, his movements efficient and sure. When she asked him to hold the horse steady while she cleaned the wound, he positioned himself at the mare's head, one hand on her neck, speaking in low, soothing tones that seemed to calm the animal immediately. "What's her name?" Lila asked as she worked. "Luna. She was my wife's horse." The past tense hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Lila filed the information away and focused on her work. The wound was indeed deep, requiring careful cleaning and several layers of sutures. Reid held the flashlight steady while she worked, occasionally murmuring encouragement to Luna, who stood remarkably still for the procedure. It took nearly an hour to complete the treatment. By the time Lila had administered antibiotics and wrapped the wound, the storm had moved on, leaving behind the clean smell of rain-washed air and the musical sound of water dripping from the eaves. "She'll need to stay quiet for at least a week," Lila said, peeling off her latex gloves. "The stitches should hold, but that was a significant trauma." Reid nodded, his attention still focused on Luna. "I can move her to my place tomorrow, once the roads dry out. Actually, it would be better if she stayed here. Moving her too soon could reopen the wound, and I can monitor her recovery." She saw him struggle with the suggestion. This was clearly a man who preferred to handle his own problems, but his concern for the horse overrode his instincts for self-reliance. "I'd pay you, of course, for the treatment and boarding." "That's not necessary. I'm glad I could help." They stood in the quiet barn, the crisis past, but an odd intimacy lingering between them. The shared focus on saving Luna had created a temporary partnership that neither seemed eager to break. "I should go," Reid said finally, but he made no move toward the door. "How did she get loose?" Lila asked, partly from curiosity and partly to delay his departure. His face darkened. "Fence came down in the storm. She spooked and ran. There's a lot of rough country between my place and here, barbed wire, brambles. She could have been killed." The bloodied bridle hung from a hook where Reid had placed it, the leather torn and stained. It seemed to represent more than just damaged. Tackett was evidence of how quickly control could be lost, how even the most carefully maintained boundaries could fail when tested by forces beyond human management. "She's safe now," Lila said softly. Reid looked at her then, with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. Gratitude, certainly, but something deeper surprise, perhaps, at finding competent help in an unexpected place. "Thank you," he said. "I mean that." After he left, Lila sat in the barn with Luna, listening to the horse's steady breathing and processing what had just occurred. In the space of a few hours, her peaceful isolation had been shattered by storm and circumstance, bringing her face to face with a man whose grief seemed to match her own careful distance from the world. She touched her belly, where the baby was stirring with the first movements of the day, and wondered if this unexpected encounter was the beginning of something significant, or simply one of those random intersections that life occasionally provided. Outside, the first rays of dawn were breaking through the departing clouds, painting the wet landscape in shades of gold and green. The storm had passed, but Lila had the distinct feeling that her quiet life had been permanently altered by the events of this turbulent night. Reid Callahan returned the next morning with the sunrise, just as Lila was finishing her first cup of decaffeinated coffee. She watched through the kitchen window as his pickup truck navigated the muddy drive, noting the way he parked at a respectful distance from the house, rather than pulling up to the door like someone who assumed welcome. He emerged from the truck, carrying a leather veterinary bag that looked well used and professional. When he knocked on her door, she was struck again by his physical presence, tall and lean, with shoulders that spoke of years of hard work and eyes the color of winter sky. In daylight, the lines around those eyes told a story of squinting into sun and wind, and perhaps grief that had aged him beyond his years. "Morning," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Came to check on Luna, if that's all right." "Of course. I was just about to head out to the barn myself." They walked together across the yard, past Elena's flower garden, where broken stems from the storm were already beginning to right themselves. The morning air was crisp and clean, washed by the rain, and carrying the green scent of new growth. Luna was standing quietly in the stall, and she nickered softly when she saw Reid approach. His entire demeanor changed as he greeted the mare, his voice dropping to a gentle murmur that spoke of deep affection. He ran his hands over her carefully, checking the bandaged wound and assessing her general condition. "You did good work," he said to Lila, genuine appreciation in his voice. "The swelling's minimal, and she's bearing weight on the leg. She's a strong horse. The wound was clean, which helped." Lila had brought her suture kit from the house, and she unwrapped the wound to assess the healing. Reid held Luna's head while Lila worked, their movements falling into the same natural rhythm they had found during the crisis. There was something deeply satisfying about this partnership, the way their different skills complemented each other. "You handle her like you've worked with horses before," Reid observed. "My grandmother kept a few horses when I was young. I spent summers here, learned the basics, but it's been years since I've done anything more than basic care. It shows. She trusts you, and horses are good judges of character." The compliment, delivered in his matter-of-fact way, pleased her more than it should have. As they worked together, she found herself studying his hands, scholaused but gentle, with the kind of competence that came from decades of practice. There was something deeply attractive about a man who knew his craft so thoroughly. "How long have you had Luna?" she asked. 8 years. She was a wedding gift to my wife." The words came out carefully, as if he were testing how they sounded. "Sarah loved her more than any of the other horses." Lila noted the past tense again, filed away the name Sarah, and chose not to probe deeper. Grief had its own timeline, and she recognized the signs of someone still navigating that difficult terrain. They finished the wound care in companionable silence, and Reid lingered in the barn longer than necessary, checking on Luna's feed and water, adjusting her blanket unnecessarily. Lila recognized the behavior he was reluctant to leave, though she couldn't tell if it was because of concern for the horse or something else. "Would you like some coffee?" she found herself asking. "I made too much." He hesitated, and she could see him weighing acceptance against whatever internal rules governed his interactions with the world. Finally, he nodded. "That would be nice." They sat at Elena's kitchen table, the morning sun streaming through the windows and illuminating the careful distance Reid maintained, even in acceptance of her hospitality. He cradled the mug in both hands and looked around the room, taking in the details of her life, the prenatal vitamins on the counter, the knitting project beside her chair, the farming magazines mixed with medical journals. "How long have you been here?" he asked. 3 months. I inherited the farm from my grandmother. Lila Sandoval. I remember her. Good woman, kept to herself but always had a kind word when our paths crossed." "You knew her?" "Our properties share a fence line on the south side. Sometimes her sheep would get through, and I'd bring them back. She always insisted on paying me with tamales or fresh bread." The image of Reid delivering wayward sheep to Elena made Lila smile. It softened him somehow, made him more human and less like the distant figure she had imagined. "She would have liked knowing Luna was safe here," Lila said. "Elena always said animals could sense good people. What brought you here, besides the inheritance?" The question was asked gently, but Lila could hear the genuine curiosity behind it. She found herself wanting to be honest with him, perhaps because he had shared something personal about his wife. "Divorce. starting over, the usual story of a life that didn't turn out as planned. Reid nodded, understanding flickering in his expression. The baby's father isn't interested in being a father. The words came out more bitter than she intended. Sorry, I don't usually discuss my personal life with strangers. We're not exactly strangers anymore, Reid said quietly. Not after last night. He was right. The shared crisis had created a connection that felt deeper than their brief acquaintance should allow. There was something about working together to heal Luna that had established trust between them. How about you, she asked. How long have you been on your own? 3 years. He took a long sip of coffee, using the pause to gather himself. Sarah died in a car accident. Coming home from town in a snowstorm. I'm sorry. Thank you. He looked out the window toward the pasture where his truck was parked. It's been difficult, learning to live with the quiet. Lila understood that particular loneliness, the way silence could become oppressive when you were accustomed to sharing your days with someone else. But she also heard something else in his voice, the guilt that came with surviving, with the gradual realization that life continued even after devastating loss. Luna must be a comfort, she said. She is. Sarah trained her, spent hours working with her. Sometimes I think the horse misses her as much as I do. They sat in contemplative silence, two people who had been hollowed out by loss, finding an unexpected ease in each other's company. The morning light had shifted, and Lila realized Reid had been there for over an hour. I should let you get on with your day, he said, rising from the table. You're welcome to check on Luna whenever you want. I'm usually here. I appreciate that, and I insist on paying for her board and care. We can discuss it later. For now, let's focus on getting her well. Reid nodded and headed for the door, but paused on the threshold. If you need anything help with the farm, or if that baby decides to come early, you call me. I'm 5 minutes away. The offer was made gruffly, as if he wasn't entirely comfortable with his own generosity, but Lila could hear the sincerity behind it. After months of determined self-reliance, the idea of having someone nearby who cared about her welfare was both comforting and slightly unsettling. Thank you, she said. That means more than you know. After he left, Lila found herself returning to the barn throughout the day, checking on Luna, but also replaying the morning's conversation. Reid Callahan was clearly a complicated man, wealthy enough to own substantial property, confident in his expertise with horses, but carrying a sadness that seemed to permeate everything he did. She had noticed his hands when he held the coffee mugno wedding ring, but a pale band of skin where one had been recently removed. The detail spoke of someone still actively choosing to let go of the past, still negotiating the terms of his grief. That evening, as she prepared Luna's medication and settled the horse for the night, Lila found herself looking forward to Reid's next visit. Not because she needed help with the mare's care, but because she had enjoyed the easy conversation, the sense of being understood without having to explain herself. It had been a long time since she had felt that kind of connection with anyone, and she wasn't sure what to do with the unexpected pleasure of it. Her pregnancy had made her cautious about new relationships, protective of the emotional space she needed to prepare for motherhood. But Reid's presence felt different, safe. Somehow, perhaps because his own wounds made him understand the need for careful boundaries. As she walked back to the house under a sky brilliant with stars, Lila wondered if this was how healing began, not with grand gestures or dramatic revelations, but with small moments of recognition between two people who had learned to navigate loss and were perhaps ready to risk connection again. Over the following week, Reid's visits became part of Lila's daily rhythm. He arrived each morning around 8, after she had finished her breakfast and tended to the sheep. Their interactions developed a comfortable pattern: check Luna's wound, discuss her progress, share coffee at the kitchen table if the weather was good, or stand in the barn doorway if rain kept them sheltered. Luna's recovery was proceeding beautifully. The deep gash was healing cleanly, and the mare was beginning to show signs of her former spirit. She greeted Reid with obvious affection, nuzzling his shoulder and whickering softly when she heard his truck approaching. For Lila, She displayed a different kind of trust-allowing, the daily wound care without resistance, standing quietly while Lila changed bandages and administered medication. "She's adopted you," Reid observed on the 5th day, watching as Luna nuzzled Lila's pregnant belly with gentle curiosity. Sarah always said horses could sense pregnancy, that they became protective of expectant mothers. It was the first time he had mentioned his wife without that careful pause, and Lila took it as a sign that their growing friendship was allowing him to speak more naturally about his past. She found herself treasuring these small glimpses into his life, the way he revealed himself gradually, like a photograph developing in slow motion. "When is the baby due?" he asked, leaning against the stall door. "Mid-August, a summer baby." She rubbed her belly absently, feeling the flutter of movement that had become constant in recent weeks. "Sometimes I wonder what I was thinking, planning to do this alone." "You're not alone," Reid said quietly. "You have Dr. Martinez, Mrs. Chen, the whole community. People here take care of their own." "But I'm not really one of their own, am I? I'm Elena's granddaughter, but I'm also the outsider who showed up pregnant and divorced." Reid studied her face, noting the vulnerability she rarely allowed to surface. "Is that what you think? That you don't belong here?" "I don't know what I think anymore. 3 months ago, I had a completely different life. Married, living in Austin, working at a busy practice. Now I'm feeding sheep and learning to deliver lambs, and somehow that feels more real than anything I did before. Maybe that's because it is more real. City life can be artificial, all that noise and rushing around, but not much substance underneath." Lila looked at him with surprise. "You sound like you have experience with that." "Some. I went to college in Dallas, worked in oil and gas for a few years before I came back to run the ranch. Thought I wanted the corporate life, the big salary, the important meetings. Turned out I just wanted to come home." "What changed your mind?" Reid was quiet for a long moment, his hands absently stroking Luna's neck. "My father had a heart attack, came back to help with the ranch, and realized I'd been trying to be someone I wasn't. This land, these animals, this way of life, it's in my blood." Sarah understood that. She grew up on a ranch too, knew what it meant to belong to a place. The revelation painted a different picture of Reid than Lila had initially imagined. Not just a wealthy rancher, but someone who had also struggled with questions of identity and belonging, who had made his own journey back to what mattered most. "Do you regret it, giving up the corporate world?" "Never, especially not after—" He stopped himself, but Lila could fill in the blank. After Sarah died, the ranch had become his anchor, the thing that gave structure to his grief. Their conversations were beginning to reveal the depth of their similarities. Both had experienced major life disruptions. Both had retreated to rural Texas to rebuild themselves. Both carried the weight of relationships that had ended in pain, his through death, hers through betrayal. On the 7th day, Reid arrived to find Lila sitting in the barn with Luna, tears streaming down her face. She was holding a crumpled piece of paper, and her shoulders shook with silent sobs. "What's wrong?" Reid asked, immediately alert to crisis. "It's nothing, just the moans probably. I'm fine." But Reid didn't accept the dismissal. He sat down beside her on the hay bale, close enough to offer comfort, but far enough to respect her space. "What happened?" Lila held up the paper and ultrasound photo, but not a recent one. The image was faded, the edges worn from handling. "I found this in my purse. It's from 2 years ago, when Marcus and I were trying to get pregnant the first time. I miscarried at 10 weeks. Reid's expression softened with understanding. "I'm sorry. I thought I'd thrown all these away. Finding it just brought everything back, the excitement when we first saw this little flutter on the screen, the plans we made, the nursery we started to set up. And then the bleeding, and the doctor telling us there was no heartbeat." She leaned against the barn wall, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "Marcus was almost relieved. He said it was probably for the best, that we weren't ready anyway. That's when I knew our marriage was really over, even though it took 2 more years to admit it." Reid studied the ultrasound photo, understanding its significance. "Is that why you're so afraid? About this pregnancy?" "Part of it. The other part is wondering if I'm being fair to this baby, bringing her into a world where she'll only have one parent. Everyone else seems to manage it, but I lie awake at night wondering what I'm missing, what I can't provide. You're providing love, Reid said simply, and that's more than some children get from two parents. They sat in silence, watching Luna doze in the morning sun. Finally, Reid spoke again. Sarah and I tried for years to have children. We went through fertility treatments, specialists, everything. She blamed herself when nothing worked, thought she was somehow failing me. Lila looked at him, seeing the pain he rarely allowed to surface. I'm sorry. The point is, I know something about loss and disappointment, and I know something about the fear of trying again. But I also know that love finds a way, even when it doesn't look like what we expected. He reached into his wallet and pulled out his own photographer-faded image of a young woman with dark hair and a radiant smile, standing beside a horse. This is Sarah. She would have loved Luna's recovery, would have insisted on being here every day to help. She had this way of making everyone feel like family. She sounds wonderful. She was, but you know what she would have said about your situation. She would have said that baby is lucky to have a mother who cares enough to worry, who's strong enough to start over, who's willing to put her child's needs above her own comfort. Lila felt fresh tears threatening. How do you know that? Because that's who you are. I've watched you with Luna, seen how you care for your animals, how you've built a life here. You're not just surviving, you're creating something beautiful. The compliment, coming from someone who had no reason to flatter her, hit deeper than Reid probably intended. For months, Lila had been questioning every decision, second-guessing her choices. To have someone she respected see strength where she saw only uncertainty was a gift she hadn't expected. Thank you, she said softly, for understanding. We're both figuring it out as we go along, Reid replied. But maybe that's okay. Maybe that's how the best decisions get made. That afternoon, after Reid had left, Lila sat in Elena's rocking chair, with her knitting a tiny yellow sweater that was slowly taking shape. The ultrasound photo sat on the table beside her, no longer a source of pain but a reminder of how far she had come. The baby kicked strongly, as if responding to the afternoon's emotional revelations, and Lila found herself talking to her unborn daughter. About the farm, about the community that was slowly embracing them, about the kind man who checked on Luna every day and was teaching her that friendship could develop in the most unexpected ways. Outside, the Texas sun was setting over the rolling hills, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. It was the kind of sunset Elena had loved, the kind that made the hard work of farm life feel worthwhile. And for the first time since arriving at the farm, Lila felt truly at peace with her choices. The future was still uncertain, but it no longer felt frightening. She was building something here, a life, a home, a community for her daughter. And if Reid's friendship was part of that future, she was beginning to think that might be exactly what they both needed. By the end of Luna's second week of recovery, Reid's visits had evolved beyond veterinary necessity into something neither of them wanted to examine too closely. He would arrive with supplies for Luna's care, but linger to help with other tasks around the farm, fixing a loose board in the sheep pen, adjusting the gate that had been sticking since the storm, checking the fence line where his property bordered Elena's. Lila found herself planning her mornings around his arrival, making sure she had fresh coffee ready and choosing her clothes with more care than the isolation of farm life required. At 7 months pregnant, her options were limited, but she discovered a pleasure in Reid's appreciative glances when she wore the blue dress that brought out her eyes or the soft sweater that draped gracefully over her expanding figure. Their conversations had deepened beyond polite exchanges about horse care and weather. Reid had begun sharing stories about the ranch, how his grandfather had homesteaded the land in the 1920s, how his father had expanded the operation, how the oil discovery in the 1980s had changed everything for their family. Most people think oil money is easy money, he said one morning as they watched Luna graze in the small paddock Lila had set up for her recovery. But it comes with its own burdens. Everyone assumes you're soft, that you've never worked for anything. They don't see the years of building the ranch before the oil came in. Is that why you're so private? The assumptions people make? Reid nodded, leaning against the fence with the easy grace of a man completely comfortable in his environment. Sarah understood that. She grew up with similar Precious family, had old money from cotton and cattle. We could be ourselves with each other, without the performance that wealth sometimes requires. Lila was beginning to understand the isolation that came with Reid's circumstances. Wealthy enough to be set apart from most of his neighbors, but rooted enough in the land to resist the social circles that his status might have opened. The combination had left him uniquely alone after Sarah's death. What about friends? Other ranchers who understand the life? Some, but most of them have families, obligations. After Sarah died, I found it easier to keep to myself. People mean well, but they don't know what to say, so they either avoid you or try to fix you. And which am I doing? Reid looked at her with an expression she was learning to recognize as surprised honesty, as if she had asked a question he hadn't expected, but found himself wanting to answer. Neither. You're just present, without expectations or judgment. It's been a long time since I've had that. The compliment settled between them like something tangible, changing the quality of the silence that followed. Lila felt the shift in their dynamic, the way friendship was gradually shading into something deeper and more complicated. It was during this same conversation that Reid first acknowledged her pregnancy as something more than a medical condition to be navigated. He had been watching her move around Luna, noting the way she adapted her usual efficiency to accommodate her changing body. "Have you thought about the birth?" he asked. "I mean, being out here, away from the hospital." "I've been in touch with Dr. Rodriguez at the county hospital. She's agreed to be my attending physician. But honestly, I'm hoping for a home birth. I've delivered dozens of babies in home settings. It's often safer and less stressful than hospitals." "What about complications?" "That's always a risk, but I'm healthy. The pregnancy is progressing normally, and I have all the emergency protocols in place. Plus, Carmen Martinez has been a veterinarian for 40 years. She's seen every kind of birth emergency imaginable." Reid was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "You'll need help, someone to be with you during labor. Carmen has agreed to assist, and Mrs. Chen insists she knows about these things, though I'm not sure what her actual experience is." "What about after? Those first few weeks when you're recovering?" The questions revealed a depth of concern that touched something tender in Lila's chest. Reid was thinking through her situation with the kind of careful attention usually reserved for family members. "I'll manage. Women have been doing this for centuries. That doesn't mean you have to do it alone." The intensity in his voice made her look at him more carefully. There was something almost fierce in his expression, a protectiveness that seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. "Reid, I mean it. When the time comes, if you need anything at all, you call me, day or night. You barely know me. I know enough." That afternoon, Reid stayed longer than usual, helping Lila prepare the small room she had designated as a nursery. Elena's old sewing room was being transformed with careful attention to both practicality and beauty. The walls were painted a soft sage green, and afternoon light streamed through windows that looked out over the pasture where Luna now grazed contentedly. Reid had arrived with a hand-carved cradle in the back of his truck, a piece of furniture, so beautiful it took Lila's breath away. The wood was honey-colored oak, polished to a warm glow, with intricate scrollwork along the sides. "I made this for Sarah," he said, setting it carefully in the center of the room. "Never got to use it. Seems like it should serve its purpose." Lila ran her fingers over the smooth wood, overwhelmed by the generosity of the gift and the trust it represented. This wasn't just furniture, it was Reid's hope made tangible, his dreams given form. "I can't accept this. It's too precious. It's just sitting in my workshop, collecting dust. A cradle should hold a baby." "But what if someday you have children of your own?" Reid's expression went carefully neutral. "That's not going to happen. You don't know that. You're young enough you could remarry. No. The word came out sharp enough to end the conversation. I had my chance at that life. This cradle should be used by someone who still believes in that possibility. Lila understood that she was witnessing something significant. Reid's deliberate closing of a door, his conscious choice to honor his past by sacrificing his future. The gesture moved her deeply, even as it worried her. At least let me pay you for it. You can't pay for something that was made with love for a child who never came. Consider it Elena's granddaughter's inheritance. They spent the rest of the afternoon arranging the nursery, Reid's practical suggestions complementing Lila's vision of comfort and beauty. He hung curtains, assembled the changing table Mrs. Chen's grandson had built, and positioned Elena's old rocking chair to catch the best light for nursing. When they finished, the room felt complete in a way that satisfied them both. Reid stood in the doorway, surveying their work with an expression that combined satisfaction with something deeper, perhaps a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. "She's going to love it here," he said softly. "You think it's a girl too? Call it intuition. Luna thinks so too. She's been extra gentle with you, the way mares get around pregnant women carrying fillies." Lila laughed, the sound lighter than it had been in months. "Is that an actual thing, or are you making it up?" "Little of both, probably. But I trust Luna's judgment." As evening approached and Reid prepared to leave, their usual parting felt different, more reluctant, charged with unspoken possibilities. They had spent hours creating a space for Lila's baby, but they had also created something between themselves, a partnership that felt natural and right. "Thank you," Lila said as they stood by his truck. "For everything, the cradle, the help, the—" "You don't need to thank me. This is what neighbors do." But they both knew it was more than that. Neighbors didn't spend entire afternoons preparing nurseries, didn't offer hand-carved cradles that represented their deepest hopes, didn't look at each other with the careful attention of people trying not to acknowledge attraction. That night, as Lila sat in the rocking chair Reid had positioned perfectly for the evening light, she felt the baby moving restlessly inside her. She placed her hands on her belly and spoke to her daughter about the day, about the beautiful room they had prepared, about the kind man who was becoming such an important part of their lives. The cradle sat beside her chair, catching the last rays of sunlight through the window. It was a symbol of hope and loss, of the complexity of human connections, of the way love could take unexpected forms. As Lila prepared for bed, she found herself imagining her daughter sleeping peacefully in the cradle Reid had made with his own hands for a child he had never met. The thought filled her with a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer evening and everything to do with the growing certainty that she and Reid were building something together, something that honored their past wounds while opening space for healing and new possibilities. 3 weeks into Luna's recovery, the mare was ready to return to Reid's ranch. The wound had healed cleanly, leaving only a thin silver scar that would fade with time. Her strength had returned, and she moved with the fluid grace that marked her as a well-bred quarter horse. But neither Reid nor Lila seemed eager to end the arrangement that had brought them together daily. "She could stay another few days," Lila suggested, as they watched Luna canter around the small paddock. "Just to be completely sure the healing is solid." "The wound is perfect," Reid replied, but his tone suggested he was open to the delay. "Though I suppose it wouldn't hurt to be cautious." They were dancing around the obvious that Luna's recovery was no longer the reason for Reid's daily visits, and that both of them were reluctant to break the rhythm that had developed between them. The morning coffees, the shared work around the farm, the quiet conversations that revealed more of themselves with each passing day. It was during one of these extended visits that Lila discovered Reid's shrine to Sarah. She had been looking for him to ask about repairing a section of fence when she found him in Luna's stall, standing perfectly still with his eyes closed. In his hands, he held a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon, love letters, by the look of them, worn soft from repeated handling. "I'm sorry," Lila said, starting to back away. "I didn't mean to intrude." "It's all right." Reid's voice was rough with emotion. Sometimes I read these to Luna, Sarah's letters from when we were courting. Luna remembers her voice, I think. Lila understood immediately. The letters were Reid's way of keeping Sarah present, of maintaining a connection that death had severed but love refused to abandon. She had her own rituals for Marcus' old text messages she couldn't bring herself to delete, photos she kept but never looked at. "How long were you married?" she asked gently. 12 years. Met her when she was 22, and I was 25. She was working at the feed store, going to night school for her business degree. Smartest woman I ever met, and the kindest. Reid's fingers traced the ribbon that bound the letters with the careful reverence of a man handling relics. She wrote these the year we were engaged. I was traveling a lot for the oil business then, trying to establish contracts. She'd send one every week, telling me about her day, about things she'd seen that made her think of me. "Do you mind if I ask what happened? The accident?" Reid was quiet for so long that Lila thought he wouldn't answer. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Ice storm." She was coming back from town with supplies for a neighbor's sick child. Car slid off the road into a ravine. They said she died instantly, that she didn't suffer. "Reid, I'm so sorry. The hardest part isn't the grief," he continued, as if he hadn't heard her. "It's the guilt. I should have gone with her, should have insisted on driving, should have told her to wait until the roads were better. Every day I think of a dozen ways I could have prevented it." Lila recognized the weight Reid carried, the survivor's burden of believing they could have changed the outcome. She had carried similar guilt about her miscarriage, convinced that she had somehow failed to protect the life growing inside her. "You know that's not rational," she said softly. "Knowing and feeling are different things." They stood in the quiet barn, surrounded by the gentle sounds of horses and the sweet smell of hay. Reid carefully retied the ribbon around Sarah's letters, his movements precise and ceremonial. "I haven't told anyone about these," he said, "about how I still read them. Your secret is safe with me. It's not that I want to live in the past." Reid said, looking directly at her for the first time since she'd found him with the letters. "But I don't know how to move forward without feeling like I'm betraying her memory. Maybe moving forward doesn't mean forgetting. Maybe it means taking the love you shared and letting it teach you how to love again." Reid studied her face, searching for something, judgment, perhaps, or pity. Instead, he found understanding, the recognition of someone who had also struggled with questions of loyalty and healing. "Is that what you're doing, learning to love again?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Lila felt her cheeks warm under his scrutiny. "I'm trying to figure out what love even means anymore. My marriage taught me that I could be completely wrong about someone, that the person I thought I knew could become a stranger overnight. That must make it hard to trust your instincts." "Terrifying," Lila admitted, "especially now with the baby coming. Every decision feels enormous, like I'm responsible for shaping another person's entire future." Reid stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of green in his grey eyes, close enough to catch the scent of sun and horses that always clung to his clothes. "For what it's worth, I think you're doing everything right. This baby is lucky to have you." "How can you be so sure? You barely know me." "I know you spent a stormy night helping a stranger's injured horse. I know you've built a life here that honors your grandmother's memory while creating something new. I know you talk to your unborn daughter every night, telling her about the day, about the people who will love her." Lila stared at him in surprise. "How do you know that?" "Your bedroom window faces the barn. Sometimes when I'm here late checking on Luna, I can hear you. Not the words, just the tone. It's the most beautiful sound a mother's love already in full bloom." The revelation that Reid had been listening to her private conversations with her baby should have felt invasive. Instead, it felt intimate, as if he had been granted access to something sacred. The knowledge that he found beauty in these moments rather than merely overhearing them changed the quality of the space between them. "Reid." But whatever she might have said was interrupted by the sound of a car pulling into the drive. They stepped apart automatically, the spell of the moment broken by the reminder that the outside world existed beyond the shelter of the barn. Dr. Martinez emerged from her truck, medical bag in hand, arriving for Lila's scheduled prenatal checkup. She took in the scene, Reid and Lila standing close together in Luna's stall, both looking slightly flustered, with the knowing expression of someone who had witnessed the slow dance of attraction many times before. "Good morning," Carmen said, her tone carefully neutral. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Just checking on Luna," Reid said, stepping back toward the stall door. "I should let you two get to your appointment." But as he prepared to leave, Carmen stopped him with a gesture. "Actually, Reid, I'm glad you're here. I wanted to talk to both of you about Lila's birth plan." "I'm not sure that's appropriate," Lila began, but Carmen waved away her protest. "You're 7 months along, living alone on a rural property, planning a home birth. Reid is your closest neighbor and the most reliable person in this county. If there's an emergency, he needs to know what to expect." Reid looked uncertain. "I don't want to intrude on something so personal." "It's not about intrusion," Carmen said firmly. "It's about safety. Babies come on their own schedule, and sometimes that schedule doesn't align with medical availability." "Reid, are you squeamish about medical situations?" "No, ma'am. I've assisted with difficult births on the ranch." "Good. Then you need to know the basics, when to call for help, how to recognize complications, what to do if you arrive and find Lila in active labor." As Carmen laid out the practical realities of rural childbirth, Lila watched Reid's face transform from uncertainty to focused attention. He was taking mental notes, asking clarifying questions, approaching the subject with the same careful competence he brought to everything else. "Most births are straightforward," Carmen concluded, "but the key is having someone nearby who won't panic in an emergency. Reid, are you comfortable being that person?" "Yes," Reid said without hesitation. "Whatever Lila needs." The commitment, made so readily and completely, settled something in Lila's chest that she hadn't realized was unsettled. For months, she had been preparing to face childbirth with professional support but emotional isolation. Now, suddenly, she had someone who cared about her welfare offering to stand beside her through one of life's most vulnerable experiences. After Carmen finished the examination and left with assurances that everything was progressing perfectly, Reid lingered in the barn with Luna and the letters that connected him to his past. "Thank you," Lila said, "for agreeing to be my emergency contact. It means more than you know. Thank you for trusting me with it." They stood facing each other in the golden afternoon light, both acutely aware that they had crossed another invisible boundary. Reid was no longer just the neighbor who checked on his recovering horse. He was the person Lila would call in her hour of greatest need, the one who would witness her daughter's entrance into the world. The weight of that responsibility and the intimacy it implied hung between them like a bridge they weren't quite ready to cross, but could no longer ignore. At 36 weeks, 4 weeks earlier than expected, Lila woke at 3 in the morning to the unmistakable sensation of her water breaking. The warm rush of fluid was followed immediately by a contraction that gripped her entire abdomen with an intensity that took her breath away. This wasn't the gentle onset of labor she had planned for. This was fast, urgent, and happening now. She lay in bed for a moment, processing the reality of the situation. The baby was coming, and coming quickly. Another contraction hit before the first had fully subsided, and Lila knew with professional certainty that this was not going to be the leisurely home birth she had envisioned. Moving as quickly as her condition allowed, she called Dr. Martinez first, then the hospital, giving them her estimated timeline based on the frequency and intensity of contractions. Both confirmed what she already knew: there wasn't time to get to the hospital safely. Her third call was to Reid. "Lila?" His voice was immediately alert despite the early hour. "What's wrong?" "The baby's coming. Now, Carmen is on her way, but I need—" Another contraction cut off her words, and she heard Reid's sharp intake of breath as he recognized the sound of active labor. "I'll be right there. Don't move. Don't try to do anything except breathe. Reid, I need you to know this isn't how I planned it. I'm scared. I'm already in the truck. 5 minutes." He made it in 3. Reid burst through her front door like a man prepared for battle, carrying what appeared to be a complete medical kit. His hair was disheveled from sleep, but his movements were focused and efficient. He found Lila in the living room, gripping the back of Elena's rocking chair as another contraction peaked. "Where's Dr. Martinez?" he asked, setting down his supplies and moving immediately to Lila's side. 20 minutes out. She's coming from another emergency call." Reid processed this information with the calm competence of someone accustomed to crisis management. "Okay, what do you need me to do?" "Help me get to the bedroom. The birth kit is already set up." They made their way slowly down the hall, Reid's arm around Lila's waist, supporting her weight when contractions made walking impossible. He had transformed from the careful, emotionally guarded man she knew into someone completely present and unshakable. The bedroom had been prepared for weeks' clean sheets, towels, the supplies Carmen had recommended for a home birth. Reid surveyed the setup with approval, then turned his full attention to Lila. "Tell me what you need," he said, kneeling beside the bed where she had collapsed against a pile of pillows. "Just stay with me, don't leave me alone. I'm not going anywhere." The next hour passed in a blur of increasing intensity. Reid proved to be exactly the birth partner. Lila hadn't known she needed calm when she panicked, strong when she felt weak, completely unfazed by the raw physicality of labor. He held her hand through contractions, wiped her face with cool cloths, and spoke to her in the same steady voice he used with frightened horses. When Carmen arrived, she found them working together with an intimacy that spoke of deep trust. Reid was supporting Lila through a particularly difficult contraction, his forehead pressed against hers, murmuring encouragement that seemed to anchor her to something beyond the pain. "How are we doing?" Carmen asked, quickly assessing the situation. "Fast," Lila gasped between contractions. "Really fast." Carmen's examination confirmed what they all suspected: the baby was ready to be born, with or without medical intervention. "Reid, I need you to stay exactly where you are. You're her lifeline right now." What followed was the most intense experience of Reid's life. He watched Lila summon reserves of strength he hadn't known existed, her body working with primal efficiency to bring new life into the world. Every contraction brought them closer to meeting the child who had been the focus of so much preparation and hope. "I can see her head," Carmen announced. "One more push, Lila." Reid felt Lila's grip on his hand tighten to the point of pain, but he didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't do anything except pour every ounce of his strength into supporting her through this final effort. And then, in a rush of fluid and relief, the baby arrived. The silence that followed lasted only seconds before a strong, healthy cry filled the room. Carmen worked quickly to clear the baby's airway and assess her condition, but even Reid could see that she was perfect, tiny but vigorous, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in her new world with alert curiosity. "She's beautiful," Reid whispered, his voice thick with emotion he hadn't expected. Lila, exhausted but radiant, reached for her daughter with trembling hands. "Is she okay? Is everything?" "She's perfect," Carmen assured her, placing the baby on Lila's chest. 6 pounds, 2 ounces, breathing beautifully, a little early but clearly ready for the world. Reid watched Lila's face transform as she held her daughter for the first time. The exhaustion, the fear, the months of uncertainty, all of it disappeared in the face of overwhelming love and relief. The baby settled against her mother's chest with the satisfaction of finding exactly where she belonged. "Hello, little one," Lila murmured, tears streaming down her face. "I'm your mama." It was Reid who noticed that his own eyes were wet, that his throat was tight with emotions he couldn't name. He had witnessed something sacred, something that changed him in ways he was only beginning to understand. "What's her name?" he asked softly. "Elena," Lila said without hesitation. "Elena Grace Sandoval." The name hit Reid like a physical blow. Elena, after the grandmother who had brought them together, whose farm had become their sanctuary. Grace, for the unexpected blessings that could emerge from the deepest losses. As Carmen completed the medical necessities of birth-checking the placenta, monitoring Lila's bleeding, ensuring that mother and baby were stable, Reid found himself unable to look away from the scene on the bed. Lila and Elena, the family unit that had been forming for months, now complete and perfect and utterly vulnerable. "Reid," Lila said, catching his intense gaze. "Would you like to hold her?" The question terrified him. He had helped deliver calves and foals, had held newborn animals countless times. But this was different. This was Elena, the baby he had helped bring into the world, the child whose nursery he had prepared, whose mother had become. He couldn't finish the thought. "I don't want to hurt her," he said. "You won't." Carmen, recognizing the significance of the moment, stepped back to give them space. Reid moved carefully to the bed and held out his arms. Lila placed Elena against his chest with the trust of someone who had watched him prove his gentleness over and over again. The baby was so small, so warm, so completely perfect that Reid felt something break open inside his Chester wall. He had built around his heart after Sarah's death, a barrier he had thought was permanent. Elena's tiny hand found his finger and gripped it with surprising strength, and Reid was lost. This was what he and Sarah had dreamed of, this moment of holding new life, of feeling responsible for something infinitely precious and fragile. The joy was sharp enough to cut, mixed with grief for what he had lost and wonder at what was being offered. "She likes you," Lila observed, watching Elena settle peacefully in Reid's arms. "She's incredible," Reid managed, his voice rough with emotion. "Reid." Lila's voice was serious now, focused. "I need to tell you something. About the birth certificate." He looked up from Elena's face, noting the careful way Lila was watching him. "I listed you as her emergency contact. Not because I expect anything from you, but because you're the person I trust most to keep her safe." The words settled over Reid like a mantle, heavy with responsibility and honor. Emergency contact meant he would be the one called if something happened to Lila, the one entrusted with Elena's care, the one who would make decisions about her welfare. "Lila, I know it's a lot to ask, and I know your situation, your feelings about the past. But watching you these past weeks, seeing how you care for Luna, how you've taken care of both of us, I can't think of anyone I'd rather have looking out for her." Reid looked down at Elena, who was studying his face with the serious attention that newborns sometimes displayed. In her dark eyes, he saw possibility he had thought was lost forever, saw a future he had convinced himself he didn't deserve. "It would be an honor," he said quietly. The admission surprised him with its truth. Somewhere in the past weeks, without conscious decision or careful planning, he had fallen in love with the idea of this family. Not as a replacement for what he had lost, but as something new and unexpected and worth protecting. As the morning sun began to filter through the bedroom windows, Reid sat beside Lila's bed holding Elena, while Carmen completed her paperwork. The hospital bracelet on the baby's tiny wrist read, "Baby girl Sandoval," but Reid knew that in all the ways that mattered, she was also his to protect, his to love, his to help raise in the shadow of the Texas hills, where healing had found them all. The week following Elena's birth existed in a golden bubble of new family intimacy that felt both natural and miraculous. Reid had essentially moved into the guest room, taking over the practical aspects of farm life, while Lila recovered and learned the rhythms of motherhood. He fed the sheep each morning, maintained the vegetable garden, and handled the household tasks that new motherhood made difficult. More importantly, he had taken to fatherhood with an instinct that surprised them both. Elena seemed to recognize his voice, quieting when he spoke and settling peacefully in his arms during the fussy evening hours when Lila was exhausted. Reid would walk the floors with her, telling her about the ranch, about Luna's recovery, about the Texas landscape that would be her playground. "You're a natural," Lila observed one evening, watching Reid change Elena's diaper with the competent efficiency of someone who had learned quickly from necessity. "She's easy to love," Reid replied, lifting Elena to his shoulder and patting her back gently. Besides, I had good teachers. Sarah always said I'd be a good father someday. It was the first time since Elena's birth that Reid had mentioned Sarah without the careful distance he usually maintained. Lila noted the shift, the way fatherhood seemed to be healing something in him, even as it awakened old grief. The birth certificate had been filed with Reid listed as emergency contact, a legal designation that felt more significant with each passing day. When visitors came to meet Elena Carmen Martinez with a hand-knitted blanket, Mrs. Blaines, Chen, with enough food to last a month, they naturally included Reid in their congratulations, assuming a relationship that was undefined, but clearly meaningful. It was Mrs. Chen who first voiced what everyone was thinking. "Baby needs father," she said in her direct way, watching Reid bottle, feed Elena while Lila showered. "Good man, love baby like his own. You smart woman, you keep him." The assumption made both Reid and Lila uncomfortable, highlighting the ambiguous nature of their situation. They were living like a family, functioning as partners in Elena's care, but neither had acknowledged the romantic feelings that seemed to grow stronger each day. The comfortable routine was shattered on Elena's 8th day of life, when Reid's pickup truck was followed up the drive by a Mercedes sedan that looked distinctly out of place on the rural farm road. Reid's expression darkened immediately as he recognized the vehicle. "Who is that?" Lila asked, noting his tension. "Sarah's parents, the Whitmans." Charles and Margaret Whitman emerged from the Mercedes with the bearing of people accustomed to authority and uncomfortable with anything that challenged their expectations. Both were in their 70s, impeccably dressed despite the rural setting, and clearly displeased by what they were witnessing. Reid met them in the yard, his body language defensive. Lila watched from the kitchen window, Elena sleeping in her arms, understanding instinctively that this was a confrontation that had been building for some time. "Charles, Margaret." Reid's greeting was polite but cold. "Reid." Charles Whitman's voice carried the weight of old money and older disapproval. "We heard some disturbing rumors in town. Something about you playing house with a pregnant woman, neglecting Sarah's memory. That's not what this is, isn't it?" Margaret Whitman's voice was sharp with hurt and accusation. 3 years, Reid. 3 years since we lost our daughter, and you're already replacing her, moving some stranger into what should be Sarah's home. This isn't Sarah's home. This is Elena's farm, and Lila is my friend." "Friend?" Charles laughed bitterly. "Is that what they're calling it? The whole county is talking about how you've been living here, playing father to another man's child." Reid's hands clenched at his sides, and Lila could see him struggling to maintain control. "What happens in my life is my business. Not when it dishonors our daughter's memory," Margaret said, her voice breaking. "She loved you more than life itself, Reid. How can you stand where she stood, hold another woman's baby, and call it friendship?" The accusation hit its mark. Reid's face went pale, and Lila saw the guilt that always lurked beneath his surface composure rise up to choke him. This was his deepest fear, made manifest that loving again meant betraying Sarah, that moving forward meant leaving her behind. "I loved your daughter," Reid said quietly. "I will always love her, but she's gone and I'm still here." "Are you?" Charles stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Because the Reid we know would never have disrespected Sarah's memory like this. The Reid we know understood that some love is too sacred to replace." Lila couldn't stay hidden any longer. She emerged from the house with Elena, determined to defend Reid from accusations that were tearing him apart. But as she approached the group, she heard Margaret Whitman's voice carry clearly across the yard. "She's using you, Reid. Can't you see that? This woman shows up pregnant and alone, and suddenly you're the perfect solution to her problems. She gets a father for her bastard child and access to the Callahan money. It's the oldest story in the world." "That's enough," Reid said sharply. But Margaret continued, her grief and anger spilling over into cruelty. "Sarah couldn't give you children, so you find the first desperate woman who can. How convenient that she comes with one already made." Lila stopped walking, Elena heavy in her arms, the words hitting her like physical blows. The accusation voiced every insecurity she had carried about her relationship with Reid, every doubt about whether he cared for her or simply saw her as a way to fill the void Sarah's death had left. "Do you even love her?" Margaret demanded. "Or is she just a placeholder, a way to play at the family you never had with Sarah?" Reid's answer, when it came, was the silence that spoke louder than words. He stood frozen between his grief for Sarah and his feelings for Lila, unable to defend either relationship without seeming to betray the other. That silence was enough for Lila. She understood with painful clarity that Reid wasn't ready to choose a future with her, that perhaps he never would be. The Whitmans were right about one thing: she had been using him, allowing him to play father to Elena without considering the cost to his relationship with his past. She turned and walked back to the house, Elena fussing as if sensing her mother's distress. Behind her, she could hear voices rising as Reid finally found his anger, but it was too late. The damage was done. Inside the house, Lila moved through Elena's room with mechanical efficiency, packing the essential items they would need for an extended absence. She couldn't stay here, couldn't continue to be the reason Reid was torn between honoring his past and embracing his present. Elena deserved better than to grow up as a consolation prize, a substitute for the children Reid should have had with Sarah. And Lila deserved better than to always wonder if she was loved for herself or simply because she had arrived at the right moment in Reid's grief. Through the window, she could see Reid still arguing with the Whitmans, his face flushed with anger and hurt. But he hadn't followed her inside, hadn't come to defend their relationship or declare his feelings. His silence in the face of Margaret's accusations had told Lila everything she needed to know. By the time Reid knocked on her door 20 minutes later, Lila had made her decision. Elena was fed and settled in her car seat, and 2 suitcases sat by the front door. "Lila, please, let me explain." "There's nothing to explain," she said, not meeting his eyes. "Your in-laws are right. This situation isn't fair to any of us. They don't understand. Don't they? You've been trapped between your past and present since the day we met. I thought time would change that, but it won't, not as long as I'm here, making you choose." Reid looked at the packed bags, understanding dawning in his expression. "Where will you go?" "Austin. I have friends there, colleagues from my practice. Elena and I will be fine." "Lila, please don't do this. Not because of what they said. I'm not doing this because of them. I'm doing this because of the silence after they said it. Because when Margaret asked if you loved me, you couldn't answer." Reid's face crumpled, and Lila saw the truth he couldn't speak. He cared for her, perhaps even loved her in his way, but he wasn't free to give himself completely to that love. Sarah's ghost stood between them, and it always would. "I need you to take Elena to the truck," Lila said softly. "I can't carry her and the bags." Reid stared at her for a long moment, then picked up Elena's car seat with hands that shook slightly. As they walked to Lila's Honda Civic, he spoke without looking at her. "The birth certificate lists me as emergency contact. I'll have it changed. What if you need help? What if Elena needs something? We'll manage. We managed before we met you." They secured Elena in the car seat, both of them acutely aware that this might be the last time Reid held the baby who had become so precious to him. Elena gurgled happily, unaware that her world was about to change dramatically. "This isn't what I want," Reid said as Lila started the engine. "I know, but it's what we both need." As she drove away, Lila looked in the rearview mirror to see Reid standing in the drive, the Whitmans' Mercedes still parked nearby. He looked like a man who had lost everything twice, and perhaps that was exactly what had happened. The last thing she saw before the farm disappeared around a bend in the road was Reid walking toward Luna's paddock, seeking comfort from the horse, who remembered Sarah's voice and understood the weight of loss that no amount of new love could ever completely lift. For 3 days after Lila left, Reid existed in a state of suspended animation. He went through the motions of ranch, life-feeding cattle, checking fences, maintaining equipment, but his heart remained fixed on the empty farmhouse across the valley, where silence had replaced the gentle sounds of new family life. The Whitmans had departed immediately after their confrontation, satisfied that they had protected Sarah's memory from what they saw as desecration. But their victory felt hollow to Reid, who understood too late that they had forced him to choose between honoring his dead wife and embracing the living woman who had brought joy back into his life. On the third evening, he found himself in his workshop, standing before the shrine he had maintained to Sarah since her death. Her wedding dress hung in a preservation bag, surrounded by photographs that chronicled their 12 years together. Her jewelry box sat on a shelf, still containing the earrings she had worn on their last anniversary. Her books filled one wall, bookmarks still in place where she had stopped reading. But it was her wedding ring that drew his attention, a simple band that matched the one he had worn until Elena's birth, when he had quietly removed it and placed it in this sacred space. The ring sat in a velvet box beside a photo of Sarah on their wedding day, her face radiant with happiness and hope for their future together. Reid picked up the ring and turned it over in his palm, remembering the day he had placed it on Sarah's finger, the promises they had made to love each other through whatever challenges life might bring. Death hadn't been part of their calculations, but it had come anyway, severing their physical connection while leaving their emotional bond intact. "I don't know what to do," he said aloud, addressing the photo as if Sarah could hear him. "I loved you with everything I had, but I love them too, and I don't know how to do both." The workshop was silent, except for the whisper of wind through the eaves and the distant lowing of cattle settling for the night. Reid had spent countless hours here, crafting furniture with his hands, while his heart gradually learned to function around the Sarah-shaped hole that her death had left. The cradle he had made for their never-born children, the one that now sat empty in Elena's abandoned nursery, had been created in this space where grief and hope intermingled. As he held Sarah's ring, Reid began to understand something that had eluded him for 3 years of careful mourning. Loving Sarah and loving Lila weren't mutually exclusive. Sarah had taught him how to love completely, how to build a partnership based on trust and shared dreams. Those lessons hadn't died with her, they had prepared him to recognize love when it appeared again in an unexpected form. The guilt he carried wasn't about betraying Sarah's memory. It was about surviving when she hadn't, about finding happiness she would never experience, about moving forward when part of him wanted to remain frozen in the moment before loss changed everything. But as Reid sat surrounded by the artifacts of his marriage, he heard Sarah's voice as clearly as if she were standing beside him. Not literally, he wasn't a man given to supernatural visitations, but in the memory of her practical wisdom, her generous heart, her belief that love multiplied rather than diminished when shared. "You would have loved them," he said to her photo. "Elena especially. She has your stubbornness and Lila's gentle strength. You would have insisted I not let them go." The realization hit him like cold water. Sarah would have been furious with him for choosing grief over love, for honoring her memory by denying himself the family they had both wanted. She had been a woman who believed in second chances, who had rescued injured animals and nursed them back to health, who had seen potential where others saw only damage. Reid opened the velvet box and looked at Sarah's wedding ring one final time. Then, with movements that felt both ceremonial and liberating, he placed it back beside her photograph and stepped away from the shrine. For 3 years, he had used this space to commune with his past. Tonight, he was choosing his future. Reid drove to Elena's farm with the urgency of a man who had finally understood what he was losing. The house was dark, the windows blank, the silence profound. Lila's Honda Civic was gone, the driveway empty, except for tire tracks in the gravel that led away from everything they had built together. He used his key, Lila had given it to him weeks ago, for emergencies, and walked through the rooms that still held the scent of new motherhood and the faint sweetness of baby powder. Elena's nursery looked exactly as they had left it, the cradle Reid had made sitting ready for a child who might never sleep in it again. On Lila's bedside table, he found what he was looking for, a business card for Dr. Patricia Reyes, the midwife practice in Austin, where Lila had once worked. It was his only clue to where she might have gone, his one connection to the woman who had changed his life in the space of a few short months. The drive to Austin took 4 hours, but Reid made it in 3.5, pushing his truck through the darkness with the single-minded focus of a man on a mission. He had Sarah's blessing not literally, but in the memory of who she had been and what she would have wanted for him. More importantly, he had his own permission to love again, to build a family from the pieces of 2 broken hearts and the perfect innocence of a baby who deserved a father's protection. Dr. Reyes's practice was located in a converted house in South Austin, and Reid sat in the parking lot until 8 in the morning when the first staff members arrived. He intercepted a woman who looked like she might be in charge, introducing himself with the desperate politeness of someone whose entire future depended on a stranger's kindness. "I'm looking for Lila Sandoval," he said. "She used to work here. I think she might have come back." The woman, Dr. Reyes, as it turned out, studied Reid with the careful assessment of someone who had seen too many men claiming urgent need to find women who might not want to be found. "Are you the father?" she asked bluntly. "No. Yes. It's complicated." "It's usually complicated. What's your name?" "Reid Callahan. I'm listed as Elena's emergency contact." Dr. Reyes's expression shifted slightly. Lila had obviously mentioned him, though Reid couldn't tell if the reference had been positive or cautionary. "She's not here," Dr. Reyes said finally. "But I can tell you that she and the baby are safe and well cared for. I need to see her, to explain, to apologize. What you need to do is think very carefully about why you're here and what you're prepared to offer. Lila is a good woman who's been hurt enough. If you're not absolutely certain about your intentions, you should leave her alone." Reid met her eyes directly. "I'm certain. I love her, and I love Elena. I want to marry her and raise that baby as my own. I want to build a life together, if she'll have me." "Then you'll need to prove it. Words are easy, Mr. Callahan. Lila needs to see evidence that you're ready to choose her over your past." Dr. Reyes handed him a piece of paper with an address. "She's staying with friends, but if you hurt her again, you'll answer to me." Reid took the address with hands that shook slightly. He was about to risk everything on a woman who had every reason to refuse him, to lay his heart bare to someone he had already failed once. But as he drove through Austin's morning traffic toward an uncertain future, he carried Sarah's wedding ring in his pocket, not as a burden this time, but as a blessing on the love he was determined to claim. Lila was packing Elena's diaper bag when she heard the familiar rumble of Reid's pickup truck in the driveway. Through the window of her friend Maria's guest room, she could see him sitting in the cab, gathering himself for what he clearly knew would be a difficult conversation. For 3 days, she had been preparing for this moment while hoping it would never come. Part of her wanted him to fight for her, to choose her, over the comfortable prison of his grief. But another part, the part that had been broken by Marcus's betrayal, was terrified of hoping again, only to discover that she was still second choice to a ghost. Elena was sleeping peacefully in the portable crib Maria had borrowed from another friend. At 10 days old, she was already changing daily, becoming more alert, more responsive to voices and faces. Reid had missed 3 days of her development, 3 days of the milestones he had been so eager to witness. When Reid knocked on the door, Lila opened it before Maria could interfere. Her friend had been protective and vocal about her opinions of men who couldn't make up their minds, but this was Lila's decision to make. Reid looked exhausted, as if he hadn't slept since she left. His hair was disheveled, his clothes wrinkled, and there was a desperate quality to his expression that she had never seen before. "Can we talk?" he asked. Lila stepped onto the front porch, closing the door behind her to give them privacy. "How did you find me?" "Dr. Reyes. I convinced her I wasn't a stalker." "Are you?" "Maybe a little." Reid's attempt at humor fell flat, and he quickly grew serious again. "Lila, I made a mistake, the biggest mistake of my life." "Which mistake?" Not defending me to your in-laws or letting me leave without fighting for us. Both. All of it. Reid stepped closer, close enough that she could see the raw emotion in his eyes. I let fear make my decisions, and I hurt the person I love most in the world. Lila felt her heart skip at the word love, but she forced herself to remain cautious. You love Sarah. You've made that very clear. I did love Sarah. I'll always love her. But she's gone, Lila, and you're here. You and Elena are here, and you're real, and I've been an idiot to think that honoring one love means denying another. It's not that simple, Reid. I can't compete with a memory, and I won't ask Elena to grow up in the shadow of the children you should have had with someone else. Reid reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. For a moment, Lila's breath caught, thinking he was about to propose in the most inappropriate possible circumstances. Instead, he opened the box to reveal a simple gold wedding band. This was Sarah's ring, he said quietly. I kept it in a shrine I built to her memory, along with all the other pieces of our life together. For 3 years, I visited that shrine every day, talking to her photograph, asking her permission to keep living. Lila said nothing, sensing that Reid needed to work through this explanation at his own pace. The night you left, I went there again, and I realized that I wasn't honoring Sarah's memory, I was hiding behind it. She would have been furious with me for letting you go, for choosing grief over love. Reid closed the box and returned it to his pocket. So I'm returning her ring to its proper place with her belongings as a memorial to what we shared. And I'm here to ask if you'll let me prove that you and Elena are my present and my future. Reid, I know I hurt you. I know I failed when you needed me to stand up for us. But I also know that what we have is worth fighting for. Elena deserves a father who will love her unconditionally, and you deserve a partner who will never make you doubt your place in his heart. Lila looked at this man who had helped deliver her daughter, who had carved a cradle with his own hands, who had held her through the most vulnerable moments of her life. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that he was finally free to love her completely. How do I know this won't happen again? How do I know that the next time someone questions your feelings for us, you won't retreat back into your safe grief? Reid was quiet for a long moment, and Lila could see him choosing his words carefully. You don't know, he said finally. Just like I don't know that you won't decide I'm too complicated, too damaged to build a life with. Love requires faith, Lila. Faith that people can change, that they can choose to be better than their worst moments. And if I give you that faith, what exactly are you offering in return? Reid's expression grew intense, focused. Everything. Marriage, if you'll have me. Adoption papers for Elena, so she'll legally be mine as well as yours. A life on the ranch where she can grow up with horses and wide open spaces and parents who love her more than their own lives. The offer was everything Lila had dreamed of, but hadn't dared hope for. Reid wasn't just asking her to resume their tentative relationship, he was proposing a complete commitment, a legal and emotional binding that would make them a real family. You want to adopt Elena? I want to be her father in every way that matters. I want to walk her to school, teach her to ride, threaten her first boyfriend, and walk her down the aisle someday. I want to love her like she's mine because she is mine, in every way except biology. Tears were streaming down Lila's face now, all her careful emotional defenses crumbling in the face of Reid's absolute certainty. What about the Whitmans? They'll never accept this. They'll have to. Sarah is gone, and they can't hold me hostage to their grief forever. Besides, once they meet Elena, they'll understand. She has a way of making people fall in love with her. Reid stepped closer, close enough to touch her face, to wipe away the tears with gentle fingers. I love you, Lila Sandoval. I love your strength, your kindness, your fierce protection of Elena. I love the way you talk to her every night, telling her about her day. I love how you make coffee too strong and how you cry at sunset. I love that you saved Luna, and in doing so, you saved me. Reid. Let me finish. I love that Elena knows my voice, that she trusts me to take care of her. I love that we fit together like we were designed for each other. And I promise you, on Sarah's memory and Elena's future, that I will never again let fear keep me from fighting for this family." Lila looked into Reid's eyes and saw the man she had fallen in love with, not the grief-stricken widower, not the wealthy rancher, but the gentle soul who had held her hand through childbirth and carved a cradle for a baby who wasn't biologically his. "She's been fussy without you," Lila said softly. "Maria thinks it's colic, but I think she misses her daddy." Reid's face broke into the first genuine smile Lila had seen from him in days. Her daddy missed her too, both of them. "We should probably go home then. Elena's been asking for you. 10-day-old babies don't ask for anything except food and clean diapers. This one does. She makes this little face when she hears trucks that sound like yours, like she's disappointed when it's not you." Reid leaned down and kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promises for the future they were going to build together. When they broke apart, he reached into his other pocket and pulled out a single key on a plain keychain. "What's this?" "The key to my ranch. To our ranch, if you'll have it. I want you and Elena to come home with me, to make that big empty house into a family home." Lila took the key, feeling its weight in her palm. It was warm from Reid's pocket, solid and real and full of possibility. "Yes," she said simply, "let's go home." 6 months later, the morning mist still clung to the Texas hill country, but now it revealed a landscape transformed by love and new purpose. Lila stood at the kitchen window of Reid's ranch house, their ranch house, watching her husband load hay bales with the easy competence of a man who had found his rhythm again. Elena, now 6 months old and sitting confidently in her high chair, babbled cheerfully as she attempted to feed herself pureed sweet potatoes. Most of the food ended up on her face and hands, but she attacked the task with the determined focus she had inherited from both her parents. Her dark hair had grown into soft curls, and her eyes, Reid's eyes, everyone said, though genetics had nothing to do with it, followed her father's movements through the window with obvious devotion. "Da-da-da," Elena announced, banging her spoon on the high-chair tray. Reid's head snapped up from his work, a grin spreading across his face as he waved at his daughter through the window. The simple interaction never failed to move the easy love between Reid and Elena, the way fatherhood had settled on him like a role he was born to play. The adoption papers had been finalized 3 months ago, making Reid legally Elena's father. Judge Martinez, Carmen's sister, had presided over the ceremony with tears in her eyes as she watched Reid promise to love and protect Elena as his own child. The Whitmans had not attended, though Charles had sent a brief note acknowledging the adoption and wishing them well, a small gesture that Reid treasured as evidence of healing. Their wedding had been a simple affair held at Elena's farm, now maintained as a weekend retreat and lasting memorial to the grandmother who had brought them together. Elena had slept peacefully in Reid's arms throughout the ceremony, occasionally waking to gurgle at the assembled guests who had become their extended family. Carmen Martinez had served as matron of honor, Mrs. Chen had provided enough food for twice their number, and Dr. Reyes had traveled from Austin to witness the union she had helped facilitate. The ranch house had been transformed from a lonely bachelor's residence into a family home. Elena's nursery occupied the sunny room that had once been Reid's office, and baby equipment was scattered throughout the house with the comfortable chaos of active family life. Luna grazed in the pasture closest to the house, where Elena could see her from the nursery window, and the mare had become as protective of the baby as she was of Reid. Lila's midwife practice had evolved to serve the rural communities around them, providing prenatal care and birth assistance to women who otherwise would have had to travel hours for medical attention. Reid had converted one of the ranch's outbuildings into a modern clinic, complete with examination rooms and emergency equipment. The practice was thriving, and Lila found deep satisfaction in combining her professional skills with the life she had built in the hill country. "Mrs. Callahan," Reid said, coming through the kitchen door with hay in his hair and satisfaction in his voice, "your daughter is trying to paint the kitchen with vegetables." "Your daughter," Lila corrected, rising on her toes to kiss him and brush the hay from his hair. I distinctly remember her being completely angelic until you started teaching her to throw things. That was important motor skills development. Reid protested, lifting Elena from her high chair and spinning her around until she squealed with delight. Wasn't it, baby girl? We were developing hand-eye coordination. Elena responded by grabbing a handful of Reid's hair and tugging with the strength that only babies seem to possess. He winced, but didn't complain, instead settling her on his hip and beginning the patient process of cleaning sweet potato from her fingers. The lawyer called this morning, Lila said, watching Reid's gentle efficiency with their daughter. The final papers for Elena's trust fund are ready for signing. Reid had insisted on establishing a substantial trust for Elena, ensuring that she would never face financial uncertainty, regardless of what the future held. It was a gesture that spoke to his commitment to her welfare and his understanding that love expressed itself in practical preparation as well as emotional devotion. Good. I want everything legally secure before. Reid stopped himself, glancing at Elena with the protective instinct that had become second nature. Before what? Lila asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Reid looked at her with the expression of a man who had been keeping a secret and was ready to share it. Before we start working on giving her a brother or sister. The suggestion hung in the air between them, full of hope and possibility. They had talked generally about expanding their family, but this was the first time Reid had mentioned it as an immediate goal rather than a distant dream. Are you sure? Lila asked. Elena's still so young. I'm sure, Reid said, his voice steady with conviction. I want a house full of children, Lila. I want Elena to grow up with siblings, to never question her place in this family because she's surrounded by proof of how much she's loved. Lila felt tears threaten as she recognized the gift Reid was offering not just more children, but the security of belonging that Elena would gain from being part of a large, intentional family. Besides, Reid continued, settling Elena in her playpen and moving to wrap his arms around Lila, I have a lot of lost time to make up for. I spent 3 years thinking I'd never be a father, and now I can't imagine anything I'd rather be. Through the window, the morning mist was beginning to lift, revealing the rolling pastures where cattle grazed peacefully and horses ran free. It was the same landscape Reid had inherited from his father and grandfather, but it felt different now, not just land to be maintained, but a legacy to be shared with the next generation. Elena had fallen asleep in her playpen, exhausted by the morning's adventures in feeding herself. Reid watched her with the wonder that still surprised him daily, the simple miracle of being trusted with something so precious and irreplaceable. I dreamed about her last night, Lila said softly, following Reid's gaze to their sleeping daughter. About Elena? About Elena grown up, bringing her own children to visit the ranch, showing them Luna's descendants, telling them stories about the storm that brought us together. Reid tightened his arms around Lila, imagining the scene she described. What else did you see? You, grey-haired but still strong, teaching grandchildren to ride. Me, watching from the porch and remembering this morning when we were young and everything was just beginning. It sounds perfect. It was. But you know what the best part was? Reid waited, content to let her paint the picture of their future. In the dream, Elena wasn't the only one calling you Daddy. There were others children who looked like both of us, who belonged to this place and this family completely. Reid turned Lila in his arms so he could see her face, noting the hope and contentment that had replaced the fear and uncertainty she had carried when they first met. Then we'd better get started making that dream real, he said, leaning down to kiss her with the passion of a man who had learned not to waste time on regret when love was offering itself freely. Outside, Luna whinnied softly to her pasture mates, the sound carrying on the morning breeze like a blessing on the family that had grown from storm and healing, from loss transformed into hope, from 2 wounded hearts that had found the courage to beat as one. The mist lifted completely, revealing the Texas hill country in all its golden beauty, ready for whatever stories the next generation would write on its ancient hills. And in the ranch house, where love had learned to live again, a family prepared for the day ahead, secure in the knowledge that some bonds are stronger than blood, some healing deeper than time, and some love worth waiting a lifetime to claim.